Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Montgomery County Civic Federation's special meeting with Councilmember Will Jawando. I don't think he really needs an introduction, but he is a member of the county council. And is it your third term, Will? Or second?
Second, you're making me
Second term.
older than I am.
Yeah, sorry about that. And he's a member of the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee and the vice president of the council in a leadership role. And he has been involved in housing issues, among others, for years. And we're delighted to have him here and give us a preview of, how he feels about the various things that are pending, the bills he's co-sponsored, where he thinks we should be going on housing. So welcome, Councilmember Jawando. I'm glad you're here and I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for having me, and really appreciate all the work that you, Cheryl, and um, your the whole Civic Fed has done. I know you always bring in a lot of different speakers, and on different topics, so that's a good thing, and happy to be one of them. I want to thank your board members, thank Alan and many others. Thank you for joining tonight, and obviously all guests as well. Um, as you mentioned, I'm an at-large council member. As you know, is a fancy way of saying I represent the whole county. I'm in my second term, so in my seventh year, and I'm currently serving as the vice president, and I chair the Education and Culture Committee, which has oversight over MCPS, Montgomery College, our arts and humanities organizations, libraries, and then I'm also serve on the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee, formerly the Fed Committee, Planning, Housing, Economic Development, and I've been on these same two committees my entire time on the council. Which has been great. They're things I care about a lot. I think they're very important, and also has allowed me to develop a good level of expertise on the council. But obviously, in my previous life, I worked on issues related to education and workforce in particular. For those who don't know, I'm an attorney. I'm a civil rights attorney. I used to work at the U.S. Department of Education. So seeing Linda McMahon confirmed yesterday was something that was hard for me to watch. And the mission, among many other agencies, of trying to shut down the Department of Education is obviously crazy. But I served there for 4 years in the Obama administration. I also used to work in the U.S. Senate for Senator Obama and former Senator Sherrod Brown. I was counsel on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. And I also worked at Discovery Communications and when I left the White House and did some other things, NAACP Legal Department. But I'm born and raised here in Montgomery County, grew up in Long Branch, and still live here with my amazing wife, Michelle, and four daughters, three daughters, and one son, in that order, who are all in MCPS schools here in the county. Um, we are getting ready to head into budget season. As many of you know, the county executive will present his budget to us next Friday. And this is obviously a very, very busy time for the council and for the county, and the backdrop of a very busy time at the state level, as you alluded to earlier, Cheryl, with what's going on in Annapolis, layered on with all the uncertainty we have at the federal level, and not just uncertainty, but horrible policy. Um, I'm very proud of the work we've done on the Education and Culture Committee and our oversight role over MCPS, and happy at some other point to come and talk to you about the schools. I think there's a lot going on there, and it's very, very important. I know you want to talk more about housing tonight. Um, the elephant in the room, obviously, uh, we're experiencing tremendous anxiety and stress from folks who have lost their jobs. We have over 80,000 federal employees in Montgomery County. If you include contractors, we're well over 100,000 of our 1.1 million people population. And I remind people that, of that 1.1 million, there's 200,000 or so that are under 18, not working age. So if you take, it's even more of a significant level of our population that's connected to the federal government. That's not counting nonprofits and other organizations that benefit from federal grants and research and the like. So this is a scary time, and not to mention all the services that those folks are providing for millions and millions of Americans. Um, so we are having to deal with, and that's going to be obviously we're dealing with it right now. And I know you all, if I went around this Zoom chat, I'm sure everyone here knows multiple people who have been impacted. I've got two of my staff members who have family members that have lost jobs. It's a really scary time for a lot of reasons. Um, and so, obviously, and we're home to a lot of federal institutions like NIH and FDA and NOAA and NIST and NRC and many more federal contractors. So we're very focused on that. We are monitoring that along with the state and making sure we do what we can to make sure that Montgomery County stays the bright star that we are and supports our residents as much as we can during this time. So I want to say that I start every conversation with that now because I think it's important. If you have folks that need assistance, I want to be a resource to you personally. The council wants to be a resource to you. And
Sorry.
someone mute
I'm
there.
sorry, someone needs to mute themselves.
And so we've started a series of virtual meetings to support our federal workers and their families. We had one last week to kick off that Council President Stewart and I led. But each of my colleagues will be hosting ones coming up. There's one this Thursday focused on mental health. That's Thursday, March 6th at 7:30. So if you need more information about that, Marisa from my staff who's on can get that out about the resources we have there. I'm also introducing legislation next time we meet for when we have legislative day, which will be 2 weeks from today on the 18th, that will expedite and give preference to federal workers who have been fired for county jobs. It won't solve the problem, but it's certainly something that we can do to help folks who have been impacted. So let's talk. I know you want to talk about housing, so let's talk about housing a little bit. I think some of you may be more or less familiar with my work on housing issues. I'll start with just how I grew up. I grew up in low-income rental housing here in the county for the vast majority of my life, and know what it means to have to bounce around looking for affordability, looking for habitability, looking for a place that is sanitary and affordable. For a good portion of my young childhood, I lived in a one-room studio where my mom and I slept in the same room, and it was not well maintained. And those things stick with you, and so I have a deep personal connection, but just a human connection, as I know many of you do, to making sure that housing, which is a human right, it's not just a commodity or something that those who are fortunate enough to afford it should have. Everyone deserves to have safe, habitable housing. And I've worked really hard to tackle issues of safety, of habitability, of cost and affordability, of home ownership while I've been on the council. And I do so from a very, not only a personal point of view, but as a policymaker and as a civil rights lawyer. And as you know, if you talk to people, that's the number one issue facing people. No, the good news is, I'll give good news, bad news. Good news is no one disagrees, very few people disagree, that housing affordability is a huge issue in our community, and it affects everyone on every income level across the scale, whether you're in a wealthy part of the county and you're trying to retire or pass on or have your kids come back here, or you're a young person looking to buy a home here, or somewhere in the middle in the crunch generation like me and my wife, where we have 4 young children and we're caring for 2 elderly parents. It impacts everybody in one way or the other. So it's a huge issue. And the question is not, is it an issue? The question is, what are the most effective strategies to deliver on affordability of housing and quality of housing. And you often hear about affordability, but we sometimes we skip over quality. We had a briefing today uh, on a public hearing today on a bill that Councilmember Mink sponsored, and I'm a co-sponsor along with Council President Stewart and Councilmember Lukey, to include rental housing in our consumer protection law. There was an intentional exclusion of it in our rental housing in our consumer protection laws, which gives you less rights as a consumer. Again, someone who purchases housing to live in it, for you to, if it's not up to what the standards said or what it was advertised, it will give folks another remedy that could actually be a deterrent to not keeping up your housing. We had a briefing yesterday in the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee where on the troubled properties and the at-risk properties, there are hundreds of properties in our county that are not habitable, that have had multiple violations over multiple years, that are not well maintained. Unfortunately, and I said this yesterday in the hearing, that one of them is a place that I used to live in Quebec Terrace and in Long Branch that is still on that list 30 some years later. If you needed another example of that, we don't have enough tools in the toolbox to keep people who are paying rent to get the guarantee of what they're supposed to get. That's an example when you have these type of folks that have been on, and that's not everybody. It's the vast majority of landlords are doing a good job. But when you have 40% nearly of our county who rents, I remind people, you have almost 400,000 people, families of our community that their homes are rental properties, either multifamily or single family homes that are rented, or other type of homes that are rented. And those are their homes. And they should have the same level of expectation for habitability as anyone else. And so even if you have a small percentage of those 400,000 that are not habitable, you have tens of thousands of people who are in pretty dire situations. And so we have to continue to improve that system as well. In 2020, I passed multiple bills to help protect tenants, including relocation expenses. So now under our law, if your house, if your home or where you're living is deemed not habitable, and you have to move out, the landlord or the owner has to pay your relocation expenses during that period so that you can have somewhere to go. I also was very proud to have played a leading role in our rent stabilization law, which passed last year, it passed in 23, and the regulations came out in 24. We just had a briefing in the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee as well this week, which I encourage you to watch, about the progress that the rent stabilization law has made, how the office is running, with what's coming down the pike. The current rent allowance that is 6%. Coming up later this year, it will go down to 5.7 as the cap, and that'll be publicized as well for both landlords and for renters. Some of you are probably also aware that in 2020, I also introduced the More Housing for More People proposal. It was two proposals in there. One was rent stabilization, which we did that. It's not a perfect bill, but we got a significant bill passed. And the other was something that we're talking about again now in a different way, and I'll talk about that more. It was a missing middle zoning text amendment, which would have allowed for different types of housing like duplexes within short distance, half a mile rather, from Metro Rail transit-oriented development, which I am a proponent of and have supported in many master plans and other policies over the last seven years. My More Housing proposal, there's a new More Housing proposal, but the one I introduced was very, very different from the one that's being currently considered before the council with a different name. As I mentioned, we got the rent stabilization component. It recognized that you have to do both things. You have to protect renters, and make sure the market is not uh, taking advantage, either cost wise and or habitability wise. And you have to uh, meet the needs of different housing types as part of a many solutions that we need to address our housing uh, affordability crisis. And I say housing affordability crisis because it's really important to know that uh, that's where the crisis is. It's that people can't afford it. Um, and again, no one disagrees about that. The question is, how do we get the type of housing costs that we want and quality that we want? And one of the many things that we could do and should do at some point is to look at different types and sizes and smaller units. When my family was able to buy a house, we actually purchased a duplex in Long Branch in Silver Spring, and I lived in that for a time as well. And there is a place for different sizes and types of housing within communities. It is very communities dependent, right, and specific, and you have to be very intentional about that. That's why my proposal, which was again much narrower than the one that the planning board came out with, was focused on transit hubs, and not just every transit hub. It was metro, which we know gets strong usage historically, and where if you are going to have things like people walking and taking transit, it's more likely to happen. You want to build more densely near transit, and it was you couldn't have it any taller than the house. Couldn't be the lot coverage had to be the same, and all those things, and it was confined to those areas. Obviously, that didn't pass. The council requested at the time that the planning board study these types of approaches, and then they came back last year, as you know, with the much broader attainable housing recommendations. And I want to talk a little bit about the process because change is always hard. We as humans hate it. If I wake up in the morning and someone asks me to change my routine, my body doesn't like it. And when you change things, you have to allow for uh, a lot of feedback, a lot of understanding, and address the concerns that come up in that process, the very legitimate concerns around school capacity, which I'm very keenly aware of, around infrastructure. And I'll have to tell you all that we had dozens of water main breaks this winter, and WSSC is that's something that we have old infrastructure, right? So, of course, traffic congestion, all those things have to be factored in to any type of recommendation that's going to change the way we do things now. And we do need more housing, but what we really need is more affordable housing. And there will be some that argue that a really old and debunked theory of supply side economics, that all you have to do is build more housing at market rate and everything will work out. It's been debunked in so many areas, including housing, where over the last 40 years, we have had a supply side approach at the federal level, Democrat and Republican, at the local level, and it has not solved our problems. And it's tied to, unfortunately, old solutions that are never going to deliver the levels of affordability we need. And the government has to be the ones to demand that types of affordability with regulation of the marketplace. And if you look at some of these proposals that are out there, in my view, it's a doubling down on a very failed strategy that will not produce affordable housing at any scale that we need. There's some things that we did that have worked, like the Housing Production Fund, that have worked better than other things. And again, these are government subsidies, which I'm not against, but where you subsidize through HOC, and you create a revolving loan fund that can be used as capital to bring down and remove the speculative nature from housing. And that's the main problem. Greed. It's the main problem with our world. It's the main problem with housing production. Is that I've never met someone involved in building housing that is not a millionaire unless they work for a nonprofit. Um, and and now you have even more speculation in the market as private equity, BlackRock, others have gotten into. That's where the capital comes from, and we're expected as taxpayers to subsidize exorbitant profits. And it's just it's a failed system that doesn't work, and that is unsustainable. We don't have enough money to subsidize it. And I think you're going to have a lot of discussion about this over the next 18 months plus. And I think you see this playing out around the country, though. I don't know of any place that has built enough housing, whether you go to the most, whatever most lax zoning regulations and the most pilots and tax incentives that you get, where housing in a desirable place, where housing is actually affordable. And I think that speaks to the fact that that policy alone, while we do need to build, it's up to government to check and to create the rules and conditions in which we build. MPDU program, moderate price dwelling unit program, is a perfect example. Happened in the 70s. At the time, if you go back and read the microfilm of what people said, it was the same arguments you hear today about any sort of regulation around affordability or size or cost. You're gonna stifle the market. Nothing can get built. People will run away from here. And obviously that didn't happen. It's baked into the cost of the land. It hasn't moved up enough, frankly, in the time that in the 40 plus years that it's been in effect. And it doesn't deliver deeper levels of affordability that we need as Montgomery County has changed. You hear the argument that we are one of the most, as you know, we have one of the most diverse communities in the country. We have 4 of the top 10 most diverse communities in the country. And I'm very proud of that. A lot of that diversity happened in my lifetime. With that, we've also had a much more diversity in socioeconomic status, and where we have a lot more middle and lower income people. And so what we need is more housing that they can afford, and that is attainable. I don't think the way this process went on the attainable housing strategy was a good process. You have to get people on board. You have to explain how you're going to address legitimate concerns around infrastructure and the like, which has not been done adequately. And you have to make sure people have time to process any sort of major change. And so that's why I called for a pause on this strategy while we focus on other more high yield strategies. One of which, again, we all want to address housing. It's just, how do you do it? And do you do it with things that work, or that things that are proven to not work, and that are going to give away much needed capital for revenue for our schools, for our parks, for our libraries, for things that everyone in Montgomery County really likes. And one of the things in addition to the bill I mentioned earlier, I'm working on a bill to address the backlog of housing units that have not yet been built. This is another example. There are over 30,000 units that have been approved, some of which have been approved for a long time, that have not been built. They've sought approval and not been built, in large part because folks are waiting for market conditions where they can get as much return as they have either promised investors or want to see. And so we need to get people to use that capacity or get off of it, and let someone else come in and bid on projects. So we've been working on ways to incentivize that. Planning department has recently been talking about needing to do that as well, which I'm glad to hear. And so we'll be working on that as well. I used to serve on the region. I was chair of the Region Forward Coalition for the COG, Council on Governments, who developed the housing targets. They say, which we're at like around 30,000 that we needed to build. It's actually going to be lower now. It's going to be like 26,000 now. They've updated the numbers. But regardless of what the number is, if we could get some of this pipeline built, that would really help move us along. There's also a bill that Councilmember Mink introduced that I've co-sponsored around a demolition tax for housing production. Um, as you all know, the more common thing that's happened is people tear down a 1950s era home and build a large home on the lot as to maximum capacity, called a tear down. There's usually less people that occupies those homes, so that's not good for affordability. It drives up cost and property values and is further restrictive. We don't want to be incentivizing that. If people want to do that, they have a right to. But this bill would create a charge for the folks who do that and put that money into the housing initiative fund so we can actually produce more affordable housing. And that's a bill. It's Bill 525. Demolition tax for housing production. And I mentioned Bill 625, which is the consumer protection deficiencies, so that housing will be counted and protected by the consumer protection laws that we have in the county. And then I will be introducing, as I said, a bill around the pipeline. We've passed rent stabilization. I also want to come back to the accessory dwelling unit law that we passed to make it more flexible and less expensive for folks to create ADUs. We passed a law in my last term. We took a measured approach and it was a compromise. We haven't had as many built as we'd like. I think there's ways that we can modify the law to make it easier. And we need to, as I mentioned earlier, we need to update the moderately priced dwelling unit law and make sure we get higher percentages and require more from developers. In the short term, we need to think about increasing emergency rental assistance for renters. And unfortunately, this is going to be something this budget season and heading with the federal uncertainty that is going to be something that we're going to need to do. And we need more options for seniors to invest in more mixed income properties for them, more design for life opportunities for them. So that's these small fixes like a rail or a handrail or stairs or ramp. If we put more money into these programs, we could keep more people in their homes for longer and help them have better quality of life. And we're also have been looking at a number of ways to reduce the property tax liability for seniors who need a break, including a bill we had a public hearing on today. So I think there's agreement on a lot of those things. In addition to investing in more home ownership opportunities and down payment assistance, those are all things that we will take up in the budget process, and that since I've been on the council, we have continually increased investment into those areas. So happy to take questions. I've talked for, I think, quite a while here, and I don't want to take all the time. And happy to talk specifically about any proposals that are out there if people have questions or anything else.
I know there's been a number of questions, council member, about the current bill and the 25-year tax holiday.
Oh, yes.
Conversions. And our speaker last night, Michelle Rosenfeld, wasn't really able to talk about that very much. So maybe you could do that.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the, for folks who don't know, a pilot is a payment in lieu of taxes. Basically means you don't have to pay property tax for a period of time. You make it's a 25-year, as I've read the bill, it's a 25-year tax abatement if you convert commercial properties to residential use. This is, I think, the more worrisome part of the package that was put out, in that it could lead potentially to hundreds of millions of dollars in foregone tax revenue that is needed here in the county. I think it's a corporate giveaway of the largest magnitude without requiring deep levels of affordability at all. This requires 15%, I think, workforce housing. And sometimes you do have to incentivize deals. I'm not, against that in certain cases. But what you have to do, we already have pilot authority in the county, and you have to take it and make sure specific cases work and that you get the public interest represented and you get what you need to out of those deals. To say that for anyone who does this anywhere, for 25 years you don't have to pay property tax is insane, frankly. It's just not a good strategy. It's coming into the poker table, and it's just showing your cards and pushing your chips and just saying,
I
do
know
it.
the Geico property is going to go up for sale, and that's a really prime piece of real estate. And is this so broad that they could actually get whoever buys it 25 years of no taxes?
But potentially, yeah,
Yeah.
potentially in a very desirable place. And so I just think that, and when you talk to folks who evaluate this, you should evaluate every deal for what it is and make the best deal for the county.
Mhm.
Yeah, and the Geico thing is a good example. I mean, that could potentially apply. And so I think that this the fiscal impact on that bill is going to come out. I also mentioned the racial equity impact statement on that bill was very negative, and that it would exacerbate current racial inequities, which I agree with. You all should certainly review that. So there's a lot here. And again, we all want to solve the housing affordability crisis, but you don't do it by doubling down on failed strategies that just subsidize greed. And that's what I think, unfortunately, the pilot bill in particular would do, uh, without any checks and balances. We're the only ones here that are going to be the checks to, is this a good deal? Are we getting good levels of affordability? Is it worth hundreds of millions of dollars of asking you as taxpayers, me as taxpayers, to invest in market race housing that most people aren't going to be able to afford?
So Alan Bowser has a question about whether or not you think it's possible for us to get the workforce housing part of the corridors up more than 15%.
I think we'll have to go through the process. One of the things I'm concerned about with the corridors, I'm glad you brought up the corridors proposal, because this was brought up before by former Councilmember Reamer, and in the last council. And the problem I have with that is, one, it's a very marginal strategy. In the corridors over the last 10 years, there's only been 8 teardowns, which are pretty much the market for this type of housing on the corridors. So you're talking about less than one a year over the last 10 years. Also, the people who live on corridors, and I know because I've knocked hundreds of doors on these corridors. If you think about who lives on Georgia Avenue in Aspen Hill or on Randolph Road in East County, these are folks that are living in naturally occurring affordable housing or renting housing below market rate from other parts of those neighborhoods. And a lot of them are folks of color, are middle and low income folks, immigrant communities. And I think this could, not intentionally, but disproportionately impact those communities, where if now you can build something bigger and newer on these corridors, and you don't have a requirement that these folks are made whole and can live in these places, that they could be displaced, and in a targeted way, in a way that doesn't actually produce a ton of housing, but it could actually target some of these folks. So I don't, short answer is, Alan, yes, something, I'm sure there'll be amendments should these things move forward. And I'll be a part of that process as a member of the committee. But I think, yes, the short answer is there's not enough affordability at all in these proposals. But I also don't think it's a very high yield strategy to get where we want to go.
I know you have a hard stop, so we have a question in the chat. Do you think there can be a pause on the Now Plan? It did not have any input from residents and seems that it's being rushed through.
Well, I certainly agree with the pause. I think there's so much going on. I started with the federal uncertainty and everything that's happening. The ZTA alone is like, I don't know, 90 pages or between 60 and 90 pages. Mm-hmm. I think that's a fair request. There's a lot in there. I'm certainly not in a rush to take these things up. I think there needs to be more community input. We saw loud and clear from the process that the planning of the town halls and everything, that a lot of community members have a lot of questions. I think you'll see that again in the public hearing. So I think that's a possibility, but we'll see how it goes.
Okay. She's the Civics Federation sent a letter asking for a delay, at least in the hearings. We're having a little trouble getting our arms around this proposal. And Kate Stewart answered me and said no. So Debbie, that's the answer to that question. They've told us no.
I
Uh,
will say on the hearings that I did speak with council president and you know and urged, and she agreed that anyone who signs up to testify will be allowed to testify. They will, you know, there won't be anyone that's denied because of capacity. I understand that doesn't address your concern about having enough time to digest it, which I think is real. But I think hopefully that can be addressed uh, in how we proceed with it. Like we shouldn't be trying to rush anything through. We've got the budget coming next week. You know, this should be something we deal with uh, in the fall, in my view, when people can get their arms around it. But obviously, not great for the public hearing. But hopefully, there'll be some more time in between that folks can understand it more.
Okay, and one of our members has a concern that many of us have, that really maybe what's holding up housing is the lack of jobs, and in and people will come if there's jobs. And a lot of times that argument gets flipped on its head, saying if we build more housing, then we'll get more jobs. But when you look at the Pike and Rose report, for example, what planning did say, why isn't the housing uptake going a little faster? The developer said because the job growth doesn't justify moving any faster. So there's a little bit of frustration here about the notion that if we build housing, jobs will come. Do you have a point of view on that?
Yeah, no, it's an argument that's been out there for years. It's kind of a chicken or egg thing. I mean, my view is you need both things, and they're not obviously you need places for people to live, um, but uh, if if the jobs are there um, at the level that when people say jobs, they mostly are talking about high paying jobs. Let's start with
Mhm.
that because and when and there's so much metadata out there now that one of the reasons I'm pushing this pipeline bill is because I know that uh, folks who build housing are looking at the data out there that is collected on all of us, and they know, okay, how many jobs that pay $180,000 a year are there in this region,
Mhm.
and they backtrack what they think can not only what how much housing they think they should build, but also uh, what those prices should be.
Mhm.
And we now know, and thanks for your advocacy on this, Cheryl, and others. I have been working with the Attorney General, Anthony Brown.
Mhm.
We now know that Montgomery County properties are part of a lawsuit that we have now sued. The state of Maryland has sued for the usage of RealPage, which is a collusion tool where folks put in the prices that they charge for rent, and it from everywhere, and this one company collects them and it spits out what the rent should be, which is artificially inflated. That's kind of definition of collusion and antitrust. And Anthony Brown has signed on along with DC and 8 other states or so. Um,
Yeah.
so the short answer is if you have collusion on the price at point, and you have data mining going on at the beginning to see what people can pay, there's obviously, I think the truth is more with it's based more on the jobs. Now, that being said, we have many people who are working in retail and service jobs that need affordable housing now. So there is a need for housing. But the market rate housing, you know, that it's connected to this, what people, the reason folks haven't built in the pipeline is because they want to get a certain level of return. So there's a connection there. So I would lean more towards you bring more jobs, you're going to get the housing, particularly if they're high paying jobs, uh, as opposed to the other way around. But they are interconnected.
Yeah. I'm going to call on John Holden now because he has dying to ask some questions about the University Boulevard corridor plan. Go ahead, John.
Hi, thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Councilmember Jawando. Uh, my concern is, could you comment on the idea of more housing now perhaps being passed? I mean, it's supported by 6 council members, and then being followed up by corridor plans that further increase housing density without any guarantee of housing affordability. For example, all of the additional housing, and they project 4,000 residential units in the University Boulevard corridor plan is market rate, and is more housing now simply an interim step to even greater and more impactful corridor plans to follow. Because those of us who live near these corridors, as I do in South Four Corners, are very concerned.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And I know that there was I was reading some coverage of that town hall the other night, and there was a lot of people who were not happy about the way things have gone. I will reiterate that the tools we have as council members, as the county government, to protect the public's interest are: we can allocate density, we can put taxpayer money, your money, into deals, and we can pass laws and regulations. And we need to be using all of those to the maximum benefit of our residents. The predominant trickle-down economics, supply-side economics idea that if you do anything to ask of a developer more affordability, that you will freeze the market and will be redlined and people will run away, is a boogeyman argument that even if in the short term, which I think does happen, some folks want to punish you. Some people who develop housing want to punish an area because we pass rent stabilization or whatever, which you have seen historically in some communities. That evens out over time. And there are massive investments being made in our county right now because there's demand for housing. The White Oak area, there's going to be thousands of units. It's a new project that was there. And the developers there are going to make a ton of money, and we're working individually on helping that project happen. And so there's other investment across the county. That is an overblown kind of scare tactic. But I agree with you that we should use maximum leverage. If we're going to allow things, we should make sure we're real about the infrastructure challenges and what we're going to do about it. And we should make sure we're getting maximum affordability and the best deal for residents, and for our tax dollars. And so, and we should use zoning in that way. And it's as I started when I said at the beginning, it is community specific. Like we have a very diverse community in every way. As you know, we've got agricultural land, we've got suburban, urban, rural, and everything in between. And not all communities are exactly the same. And so I think that's why you have to move with caution with these and make sure that when we do utilize the tools in our toolbox, that we're doing so to the maximum benefit. And I think in this case, the affordability levels are not where we need them to be.
When might your pipeline bill be introduced?
I'm working hard.
Okay.
I hope in the next next month or so.
So Paul Jarozinski, quickly, please.
And someone's on
somebody's.
Councilmember Jawando, thanks for coming tonight. I have two questions for you. So what do you think is the break-even point for this conversion? Obviously, I think we all think 15% is too low. We haven't seen the fiscal impact yet, but would 30%, or should it be 50%? There was Mark Corman had a bill that required 50%. I understand that's been amended. But do we know the break-even point? And then the other question was, Michelle Rosenfeld spoke last night, noted that to have 6 co-sponsors, you only need 6 to pass the bill. So is this pretty much, are we beating a dead horse, or do you think there's any other councilman, now that they've seen the RESJ report and they've seen or maybe they haven't seen the fiscal analysis yet, that might change their—
Yeah, it's not out yet. It's not out yet. Actually, we just got a letter from the county executive today requesting more time to do the fiscal analysis because a lot of their budget people are working on the budget, which they're going to present. So they expect to have the fiscal analysis, I think, by the 18th or so of this month. So you asked a couple questions. One, what's the break-even point? The short answer is it depends, right? The reason this type of policy is not a good policy is because it depends. It is expensive to convert. Absolutely. Commercial to residential. That's why it doesn't happen a ton. But what's the break even point, or what's the right margin? Well, it certainly isn't 15%, but the question for a 25-year property tax abatement, but the question of it depends on where the property is located, what the land, we have different type of land and different prices here. It depends. And that's why you do it deal by deal. If someone has a proposal and you work that deal and you evaluate that deal, I mean, that you don't just say, I'm going to just unilaterally give you whatever you want and hope that you do the right thing. That's just not going to happen. And the bill at the state level that some of the, for nonprofit affordable housing providers have advocated for, that started at 50%, unless you're going to go like a strong number like that, where you have 50% at different levels of affordability. I think you'd need to be in that range to justify any sort of blanket, pilot. And even that state bill, I think that was 15 years. 25 years is also a very, very long time. So I think you got to evaluate the deals, and not just lay all your cards down and say we trust you to make it work.
Jerry Garson, quickly.
I'm asking a slightly different question. I'm a CPA and found a plug number of $110 million for raises in the other salaries in the school system budget, which I then mentioned because we had at the last meeting of the Montgomery County Civic Fed, we had the superintendent of schools, and that's where they admitted there's a plug number. Can we move this amount, or $110 million, out of the budget so we don't keep compounding the maintenance of effort, since we don't know how many students we're going to lose in the school system due to the federal government actions? There are two set of actions that are occurring. One is they're eliminating a lot of jobs, so people that don't have a job in this area might move to other areas. And we're also possibly deporting a large number of people who have questionable immigration status. Why are we in such a rush to, even with the school budget? Shouldn't we wait till see what's really happening?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jerry, and I appreciate all the work you've done to give voting numbers during election time too, which all of us rely on. So a couple things. I actually am concerned about the other way. I think we have a very robust private school network here, tens of thousands of students, and if some folks lose their job, I think we're going to see an influx potentially in the thousands of students of folks that live here that can no longer afford the private school that send their kids to MCPS. So I think we could actually see the opposite, our enrollment go up. You saw that in you saw that in the recession as well, the Great Recession. You saw that happen.
Okay, two more questions quickly. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, and then the last thing I was just going to say is we also have higher needs in the schools. We've got special ed that we're not servicing well, which costs more. We have students that speak English as a second language, and we have half of our students in poverty. So that requires more level of effort as well. But happy to talk more.
Okay, quickly, Leanne Tobias, and then Michael Henry, and then that's all we'll have time for.
I'll be very.
Hi there, Will. This is Leanne. How you doing? I
Good.
have a couple of questions, and I just want to preface this by saying I've worked in private equity, real estate investment on the market side, and I've worked on affordable housing as well. So I've kind of a bizarre background. But anyhow, I agree with you on more affordable housing being needed. I do agree that is where the county's effort should go. That's where the problem is. I do have a bit of a concern about the rent control law, and that is that I'm hearing that institutional investors are starting to redline Montgomery County because of the rent control law. Briefly put, if I have money, wanted to go to this region, want to put up market rate housing, I can get more of a return in Virginia and possibly in DC. So that's at least something to be aware of. Secondly, with the office conversions, you're right. It is very expensive to convert large plate office buildings to housing. And the concern is that if you've got a rent control on some of the units that are going to be produced, I, as an office owner, might be even more concerned without a significant property tax abatement of putting my money into that project. So that's another difficulty. I do like your idea of doing things on a deal by deal basis because I think that offers some potential for getting some deals done. So I just have wanted to get your comments on those because on the one, I think also the affordable housing industry and the market rate housing industry are two different animals. And my suggestion would be, what can we do to work with the affordable rate industry more successfully so that they are able to do more projects and
Yeah.
not necessarily rely on private equity or whomever to do something that they don't want to do. So any reactions?
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a lot of good points. I'll be very concise because I want to get to a couple more questions. And I told Cheryl I can stay another 7 or 8 minutes. One, the rent stabilization bill we passed is very balanced. Someone can charge whatever they want for 23 years consecutively. You can raise the rent 100% for 23 years if you wanted to. So the idea that that's constricting return it's just not. And I've had folks tell me it's not. They just don't like the idea of any restriction, which you got to balance that against folks. So there's a new construction exemption for 23 years. There's also if you want to rehabilitate your building or you have a major system that goes down, you can get an exception. So there's a lot. I encourage you to watch the session from earlier this week. I think it's a balanced law. It's not a hard cap. There's a lot of flexibility in it. Maybe in my view, maybe a little too much flexibility, but I think it, and again, there are big projects happening right now in White Oak and in Long Branch and in other parts of the county. It's not red line. Anyone who's saying it's red line is doing that because they want to reverse the law and they want to make more profit.
Well, and I didn't mean red line specifically.
No, I know what you mean.
But
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
The fact that there are people investing here. And I agree with you. We need to do more investment with people who are able to take more reasonable returns and not be asking for a 20%, 22% private equity return. That's the problem. You're never going to build enough housing if I'm taking your money to make those people more millionaires. It's just not going to work. It's not a sustainable solution and it's not a smart solution.
Yeah, I think that one thing you said that's great because I didn't know was the exemption for 23 years for new construction and getting exemptions for major rehabs. And I think the county needs to publicize that and push back a little when people go after the county for the rent control bills, rent stabilization bills. I think it's very important to stress the exemption.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, Michael Henry, go ahead.
Sorry about the delay. This is my first time hearing about the pipeline bill that you're working on in terms of call it incentives to get developers moving or disincentives for them to not get moving, or whatever you want to call it. Are we talking about like financial penalties or pulling back the entitlement? What levers are you thinking of?
Well, yeah, I mean, so both and there's some spies on the call tonight, so I don't want to give too much, detail, but yes, the answer is carrot and stick. And I think that, and again, the tools that we have are the tools that we have. How to expedited processes or review times on the carrot side. On the stick side, you lose it after a certain period of time, or the financial, or you have to pay a higher financial benefit. Currently, you can renew for $2,500 at the planning department. That has clearly not been a deterrent, because you have folks that have been holding things for over a decade. So it would be a combination of those things. And I think to send the message that, look, we want to work with you. We want these things to happen. And so I think it's get an engagement tool, but also a carrot, potentially some carrots in there, but also some sticks, because I think you need to have both.
Cool.
All right. Well, then we get to say thank you very much and good night. I know you have a hard stop and I appreciate you coming. And I also I have been meaning to tell you I appreciate your work on the antitrust issues because that was really important. And
Thank you for having me.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I would like to talk to you about the governor's bill. I was there in Annapolis about that today, and some important stuff came up. I'd like to talk to you about that sometime.
Give me a call. Would love to. And I appreciate all the work you all do and engage in our residents. So let's keep the conversation going. And I think Marisa, who works on housing in my office, put my email and our email in there, and happy to be in touch.
I'm going to download the chat and send it to Marisa because
Perfect.
it has a lot of comments from people.
Awesome. Thank
Okay.
you. Good
All
night,
right,
everybody.
thank you. Well, good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
so much.
Thank you.
Happy Mardi Gras.
Before you all sign off, today Councilmember Friedson's office offered to come on the 12th. I think it was because I pointed out some things to them about the box they put us in about this testimony. So they moved their presentation up to the 12th and suggested starting a little earlier, like maybe 6:30. So I thought I would poll the group here. I think we should take the 12th if we can get it. The more we can learn, the sooner I think the better, although these meetings may be getting exhausting to people. I don't know. So you can comment on the 12th and please comment on whether or not you think you could start at 6:30.
Okay, by me, this is Paul.
Paul, okay. Anybody else have something? Joe says yes.
Cheryl, this is Joyce. I would have a conflict. I could do only until 7 o'clock.
You mean you can't start until 7?
No, I could start at 6:30, but I would have to cut off. I've got something else at 7 o'clock on.
Okay.
on the 12th.
Okay, if we tape it then?
Yeah, that would be fine with me.
Okay, all right.
This is
Anybody else?
It's a great idea. The more we have them speak, the more we can slow them down.
Yeah. All right, we'll put that in our idea bag. Anything else? Anybody?
Can you ask him to change the hearing and then he could come on the 12th?
Yeah, no.
Just
I don't
kidding.
think- Yeah, no. I was just thinking about all the trouble it was getting him here. Anybody? Michael Henry says he has a class.
the
You have a
ideal
class
case-
that night on the 12th?
Just very brief statement. The idea actually would be to really make this a little bit more sort of interactive and give really more people rather than to listen to these actually things repeated. We already heard that several times, and probably 3/4 of the call today was actually, without ability to ask the questions.
Right. Well, he only had an hour. He had a hard stop at 8. And so
But if you have 45 minutes for questions and 15 minutes introduction, that would be actually really much more, I believe, interactive and helpful to us than having 45 minutes of talk and then 15 minutes for just a couple of questions. Just a suggestion.
okay. The Councilmember Friedson is going to have a PowerPoint, so we will have to listen to him talk and make a PowerPoint. We're not going to go straight into questions. I just don't believe that that we can do it that way. But maybe he will. I'll find out how long it is. And how long he can.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for.
I'll ask. Okay, well, I will see if I can firm up that date, whether it's going to be on the 12th or the 24th with Councilmember Friedson. I don't think if you have your testimony ready for the 13th, anything dramatic is going to happen on the 12th that would change the testimony. So I'll see what they have in mind and try to firm that up tomorrow. And we will send out an announcement. Oh, right. It's the 11th, not the 13th. It's still after the hearing. Okay, so the bill in Annapolis, if anyone's really familiar with the governor's bill, it's it's a bill that would calculate for different regions of the state, and we were the Washington region, which is Montgomery County, Prince George's County, and Howard County are grouped together, and they calculate some kind of a jobs projection and then how much housing approvals we need. And they calculate a deficit basically. And any county that's in a deficit gets a target of how many approvals they have to meet. And while you're in that deficit, trying to build, approve units and build, basically all planning applications have to be approved unless they meet one of 6 exceptions. And they're very narrowly drawn. It's like, severe threat to the health and safety of the people that are going to live in the building. Violations that there's something about it that would violate state or federal laws. And there are some others. And that all of the standards used to deny an application have to be objective, specific, and quantifiable. I think those are these kinds of words they use. So it basically takes out of the equation discretionary things. Like you might say it's not compatible with the neighborhood. It's too big. It towers over houses. We want more green space. We want a green park in the middle of this. Things that are sort of discretionary that different people could see different ways. While you're in a deficit, you can't use those kinds of, which we have in our regulations, some discretion about how compatibility and green space and stuff like that. So I went to the hearing and I was going to deliver a statement. I had to leave because there were 14 hearings and this one was last. And the governor came and accompanied by Jake Day, who's the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development for the state. And I was kind of blown away by their statements. They both, testified that all we're doing is putting a pin into each county or locality's current planning rules and freezing them and saying, while you have to use these rules, but you can't make up new ones. And Jake Day gave an example, like people don't like a project, and so then they halt the consideration of it, change the rules so they can deny this project. And so it was portrayed as just, they said, all we're doing is asking you to actually enforce and go by the rules that you have on the books, and completely sidestep that actually lots of them are shunted to the side if they don't fit into those 6 narrow categories. So it was just, I was, I'm not a naive person, but I was completely shocked at, they were sitting there telling the delegates something that was absolutely flatly wrong, and not the case. And of course, they didn't, say that, residents were going to lose their standing to sue. Currently, as Michelle said last night, any aggrieved party has standing to sue in court. And under this, only the developer can go to court when an application is denied. So it just, for a standard that's supposed to be so specific and so objective, these 6 categories, they give the developers this very vague, subjective thing saying that even if you fit into one of those 6 categories for your denial of a development, the need for more housing might outweigh the county's need to follow whatever rule that's causing the denial. And the need for housing, like, how do you weigh that? How do you weigh the need for more housing against the health and safety of people who are going to live in it? By the way, as Craig Ullman pointed out to me, the health and safety only applies to the hypothetical people who will be living in these units later. It does not apply to the people living around it, for example. So I mean, the bill is really terrible, but it really does contract and trim back the rights of what the county is doing right now if you're in a deficit. And then once you get out of the deficit, And then one really difficult thing, and I wanted to talk to Will about this. They're not going to let us count the current 30, our deficit is about 33,000, I think. And they're not going to let us count the approvals we have in the pipeline toward approvals to meeting that deficit. They're making us do 33,000 in addition to the 35,000 or so that are in the pipeline, bringing our total needed approvals to something crazy like 65,000. And the infrastructure exception is very narrow. It's only schools, and water and sewer, and that's it. You know, as Jake said, people don't want their schools overcrowded, fine, and you have to be able to flush the toilet. And that's it for infrastructure. So roads, traffic, you know, BRT, MARC train improvements, none of that infrastructure. And of course, we had almost 200 water main breaks or something. I forget the number this winter, because the water mains are 50 years old in many places. That's not an excuse not to build any development that goes before. So it's a very, very troubling bill. And I was not able to testify on it because I had to get back here for this. And at 5 o'clock, they still had many panels of supporters, Greater Washington and Dan Reed, Coalition for Smarter Growth. They pulled out big crowds. They filled up the room. There was an African American housing justice group that was there. There was at least 30 of them. And it was just really quite the scene. But I was looking at the delegates while the governor and Jake Day were presenting, and they were all smiling and nodding their heads. I think they really believed what they were hearing. And they said, well, this is very good to know. Thank you for explaining it, because my constituents are concerned about this bill, but I'm glad to hear that, you know, my county gets to keep all their rules. Well, they don't. And the huge group of African American housing justice people were all told they were going to get houses to buy, and they're not going to get houses to buy under this. There's absolutely no affordable housing requirements or any kind of funding in this. It's market rate. It's all market rate. So anyway, I found the whole scene really disturbing. It was one of the worst days in my whole long lobbying and advocacy career. I thought an awful lot of Governor Moore, supported him, and thought he showed great promise. And it was nauseating how untruthful it was. So I'm going to bring that up and try to get some advice from Will Jawando about next steps. This is going to require, I need to get down on paper, you know, a very easy to understand specific fact sheet on this issue, on this bill. And we're going to need to get it out into our neighborhoods and go to our delegates and senators and saying this bill has to be changed. I mean, the Democrats are not going to kill a governor's bill. It's going to pass, but they have to change it. And they need to change it to reflect what the governor says he wants, which is to keep all of our local rules and regulations in place and restore the standing of residents to sue in court. And probably, I think we should ask for expanding the infrastructure issue. But we're going to need to get on that pretty quickly, and I think involve our neighborhoods, because the show that was put on today by the governor and Jake Day and Greater Washington, the realtors were there were developers there. Jake Day on his panel with the governor had a developer of low income housing. It was the same old story. Local regulations are killing us, and keeping us, and of course they're not. We have 35,000 approvals that are not moving forward. But the state bill numbers, it's HB 503, and then SB, somebody help me, is that 530?
It's SB 430.
430, okay. So it's SB 430 and HB 503. Carrie, go ahead.
I was listening to what you were just saying, and two things. First of all, the More Housing Now bill is in a Euclidean zone. Okay. So those factors that you were considering, schools and congestion, all that, they don't apply because these projects can move forward by right. Okay, based on the standards in the zoning ordinance. So it's not going to apply for More Housing Now. It's going to more apply to floating zones, which are more subjective from the planning board to consider stormwater management and impact to schools, impact to road congestion, character of communities, etc. But having said all that, in the Regional District Act, it's clear. It says that the health, safety, and the welfare of the public must be the main mission for land use in Montgomery County, Montgomery and PG County. That goes back to the Department of Commerce back in 1954 when they developed the zoning standards, which was a recommendation to all states in the country. Okay, so even if the governor wanted to change it and deregulate, okay, those kind of that kind of language, the health, safety, and welfare of the public, which would remove our right to appeal these decisions to the courts. I don't think that's almost like a civil rights action. I don't think that the governor would have the power to do that. I mean, he can make the law, but I don't think it would hold up in the courts, to be honest with you. I mean, he would have to literally go back and redraft the Regional District Act, take those words out, health, safety, and welfare. Anyway, that's the way I see it.
Jerry Garson, go ahead.
One of the things that no one seems to discuss with all this is how much vacant housing we're going to have between now and I'll call it next September, October, due to the basically the federal government reducing the head count in this area and the federal government possibly eliminating a quantity of residents in here who don't have the proper documentation. And thanks to the President of the United States, the cost of lumber, which includes plywood, went up by 25% because almost all lumber in the United States is imported from Canada. Housing has just become much more unaffordable as of 12:01 a.m. this morning. And all these other tariffs and everything else that they're putting on is just making housing even less affordable. So I don't see any quantity of construction anywhere in the state occurring. Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't see in the near future housing being built that's anywhere close to affordable or attainable or desirable by lower income people. And a bill that was put in this morning by Delegate Moon is trying to drive as many jobs out of the state as possible by trying to put a tax on services such as consultants, accountants, lawyers, lobbyists, and everything else. Their goal is just to drive as many jobs out of the state, so therefore you'll have even less need for housing.
Yeah. Yep. Amy has a question. I'm very new at this. What state bill you're talking about? So it's kind of referred colloquially as the governor's bill. It was introduced at the request of the governor. We just gave the bill numbers a minute ago. It's called Housing for Jobs, I think. I keep getting that backwards, whether it's jobs for housing. It shouldn't be jobs for housing, but it's Housing for Jobs. And it's a bill that basically gives every area of the state a quota of housing that they need to build. And while they're in a deficit, and all of the Eastern Shore and the small areas, Western Maryland, are not in a deficit, and all the big counties are in a deficit to some degree. And we have a pretty large deficit. And, Will Jawando said, Council of Governments is taking down our quota of housing we need to build. But this quota is pretty big, a deficit of 33,000. And we're not going to be allowed to count whatever is already in the pipeline. So it's a huge amount of housing. So as long as you're in a deficit, I mean, I would say it this way, you lose quite a bit of control over your local approval process and planning, because you can only deny housing applications if you have a reason that fits into one of the 6 very narrow areas that would permit you to deny it. And even then, the developer can make an argument that the need for housing overrides that particular consideration. It's a pretty subjective idea. And then if the developer gets turned down and doesn't think it's in one of the 6 categories, they can go to circuit court and appeal under this law. And so then they can go to court and appeal. And then there is a pretty strong feeling among various people that the county doesn't have a lot of incentive to keep fighting things in court. They're probably more likely to throw their hands up, they keep defending these decisions one by one in court. So from my way of looking at it, it leads to a developer free-for-all.
Does this get rid of the ag reserve, or is the ag reserve still intact?
Well, the county just gets a target. And I don't know whether building in the ag reserve would fit into one of the 6 categories. I don't have them in front of me, Jerry, but I'll send them.
I'll read the bill, but it sounds like they're getting rid of the ag reserve.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. That's a good question. I hadn't thought about the ag reserve. Dan, you have your hand raised. Go ahead, Dan.
If the state is imposing all this onto the county,
Mhm.
shouldn't the infrastructure costs that occurs with that, shouldn't the state be paying for that? And should that be reflected in the fiscal impact statement of these bills?
Yeah, there's nothing in the bill that says they're going to pay for anything.
Be amended or required, or shouldn't the counties
Well,
insist?
you would think so. I think so. I was going to put that in my testimony. I didn't get to testify, but I was going to put it in my testify. If they want to control the pace and scope of development in this county, they should also be giving us the money for the infrastructure improvements at the same time. A lot of this, argument is around these, transit-rich areas, but I guess we'll finish the Purple Line someday. But the transportation budget, is not great, and we have bus rapid transit routes that don't have rapid buses on them. And, there's been plans kicking around for a while about expanding the MARC train. So I don't see a lot going on for making transit-rich areas, is what they call them, making them actually transit-rich. But yeah, no, there's nothing in the bill that says they have to pay for anything.
Well, shouldn't the bill be amended to reflect that, or shouldn't
Well, I
the
think that's one of many amendments, but look, I mean, I think, if the governor's going to show up and Jake Day and say it freezes everything that they have in place, this is only puts a pin in it and says you have to follow it and you can't start making up different rules later to deny developments. Like, developers need to know exactly what the rules are. So I think we should come up with some language that says that everything that the county now has in place continues. That's one thing I would do, and I would definitely be restoring the existing standing of any aggrieved party to sue in court, because I think that's absurd that only developers have standing to sue.
I think at a minimum, the fiscal impact statement needs to reflect either the cost to the state or to the county. So that given the budgetary shortfalls in the state, that needs to be weighed in.
Yeah. Well, exactly. You would think they're so broke, they really shouldn't be telling everyone to build all kinds of stuff that's going to cost us money that they don't have any, they're broke. So I totally agree, Dan, about the amendments, but we do need to get going on that fast. So if there's anyone that wants to volunteer to help work on that, we could always use help.
Yeah, can I add something to what you were saying?
Sure, go ahead.
And I wrote it in the chat screen. I mean, we have so many other conflicting policies and goals
Mhm.
climate action plan. Okay. Um, we want to build these automated technology data centers, right? We're buying 40% of our electricity from out of state right now, and between the data centers, that'll double that. We're going to have a 70 to 80% deficit in electricity, and in state, that we can create here in the state of Maryland. Our sewer systems, many of them across the county were built 200 years ago, when we've been patching into them and expanding them and overburdening them for years. That's why you had floods in Bethesda, constant floods in the Aspen Hill area, because they were built in the 50s. you know, it's nice that the governor wants to build more housing, but he's looking at a $50 billion deficit right now for coming years. Where's he going to come up with the other $200 billion to build modular nuclear electrical reactors and rebuild our sewer system? I mean, it just, they conflict with each other. They're not, you know what I mean? They're not compatible. You either want to, bring your infrastructure up to the 21st century, okay, so that you can grow, or you grow and the hell with your infrastructure, and you become like a third world country. You got one or the other. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's asinine, actually. Okay, and anyone who thinks they can help, put a fact sheet together, help with a little grassroots campaign here. I know there are other people working on this through the Communities Coalition, but we do need a civic federation, very specific position. So if you're good on policy and you want to help with that, please let me know. And I think we should call it a night. It's Kim Prasad who says the afternoon house hearing went better. Okay. All right, good. I'll talk to Kim. All right. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. And I will let you know very soon about Councilmember Friedson.
Well, thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.